Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Between Monsters and Men. Today we are going to dive into the haunting of Edinburgh Castle. With over 900 years of history within the stone walls, it's absolutely not surprising at all that the dungeons hold more than just a few skeletons. Edinburgh is a large military fortress that rules the skyline of the city of Edinburgh, Scotland, but it wasn't always a standing fortress. It was first used as a settlement around 850 AD, but became a royal residence in the 12th century. It was during this time period when the castle would undergo attacks, executions, and even capture by the English. The beautiful structure now stands just as tall as the day it was built, as a tourist attraction, with a few lingering souls who are forever at home within the solid walls. There is speculation over the first heard legend of the drummer boy, most claiming of 1650 being the first sighting, but I was able to find a legend within a book that claims the headless drummer was first heard in 1296. This drummer alerted the Scots of an English attack led by King Edward I of England, who had captured the castle after a 3-day siege. From this book I also found that the drummer was said to be the first man to be slit from ear to ear by an English sword, but this is all legend. After this mentioning, his next appearance was in 1650. Where his drums were heard before the castle was taken by Oliver Cromwell's forces. Later sightings of the drummer would involve him either being invisible and sometimes headless, but you'll always hear the drumming along with his presence. The last reported sighting was back in 1960s due to the fact that he is more of a bad omen, much like the Flying Dutchman. Since the attacks in Edinburgh was seized, so has his appearance. But there has been a few very rare occasions where people hear the faint playing of the drum. Probably the most famous spirit is that of a young bagpiper. Several hundred years ago, there were tunnels that were found beneath Edinburgh Castle that leads towards Holyrood House at the bottom of the Royal Mile. Since the opening to the tunnel was so small, a young boy was sent down with his bagpipes to help lead an investigation. His job was to play the pipes loud enough so that as he walked through the tunnels, the people above could work out where the tunnel went. Abruptly, the pipes stopped when they reached the Tronkirk. Unsure what happened, search parties were sent to find the boy. However, he was never found, and neither were his bagpipes. The piper's ghost now haunts Edinburgh, walking endlessly along the underground tunnel. His music can be heard from within the castle and above the tunnels on the streets. Hundreds of suspected witches were burned at the stake in the early 16th century, but none quite as known as Lady Glamis. Known also as Lady Janet Douglas, she was accused of witchcraft under the conspiracy to murder King James V. The only evidence obtained against her came from the torturing of her servants. She was burned at the stake on July 17, 1537, with her young son Lipsy being forced to watch from the battlements. Now restless, she's seen and heard in different parts of the castle. Her spirit has attributed to the hollow knocking sounds that are heard at night that are said to be the workmen building the platform at which she burned on, to some even claiming to see her screaming in the flames. Others have described a feeling of being scorched by fire. She is also heard weeping for her son. This spirit is also said to haunt the Glamis Castle in Angus. How, you may say? Apparently some spirits are strong enough to appear in multiple different places. Just ask the Bell Witch. Shadowy figures and ghostly orbs can be seen in the dungeons where Lady Janet's servants, as well as prisoners of war and enemy spies, were tortured and left for death. Mr. Boots is described as wearing knee-high length boots, trousers that fit into the boots, and a very dirty ruffled white shirt. He's unkempt and unshaven and has very bad breath. At least this is what all the mediums who have come to Edinburgh claim. He speaks through them, advising that the lights better be pointed at the ground of his room, otherwise he'd go berserk. These mediums have investigated Mr. Boots' room and believe that it was a crime scene, where he had killed a girl who also haunts the same room. These mediums who claimed all this have never met each other and have no outstanding standing in the world, no shows and no books, so the people who've hired them are pretty adamant on what they say, since they have all said the same thing or similar to. Mr. Boots, if spotted, disappears, but he definitely doesn't like the tourist groups, since he sometimes switches off the lights and blows out the candles on them. He is also said to feed off the energy from the groups of people. Jack is the ghost of a little boy reported to be in 18th century attire. He wanders the arches. He is believed to have been killed during the construction of the bridge. With him there are a number of spirit children running around. Tourists have said to feel the hand of a child clasp theirs, or heard the sound of childlike laughter. In 1689, Lord Balcarres saw Viscount Dundee in Edinburgh Castle. However, this was impossible, since that very day Viscount Dundee had had died in the Battle of Killiecrankie, but ever since that sighting he's appeared periodically. That same year of the Dundee's first sighting, Duke of Gordon, governor of the castle, stabbed his steward for bringing news of his family's death. Now the steward wanders the halls. At one point in time, a desperate prisoner hid in a dung barrow, hoping to be carried out of the castle down the Royal Mile and escape to freedom. Unfortunately for him, he died when the barrow was emptied down the rocky slopes of the castle, sending him to his death. Visitors say his ghost shoved him from the battlements, and is accompanied by a strong and unpleasant smell of dung. John Graham of Claverhouse is also said to haunt the castle, along with his accomplice Bloody George Mackenzie. Other less known specimens have been seen and heard, such as an invisible marching of masked men, ghosts of prisoners plaguing the dungeons during the Napoleonic Wars, blue orbs floating about, the spirit of the French prisoners from the 7-Year War, and the colonial prisoners from the American Revolutionary War. The ghost of a dog that is said to wander the cemetery and entrance, who's even been said to plop down by visitors' feet. The Duke Alexander Stewart of Albany, and even the ghosts of birds. It was April 6th through 17th of 2001 when Edinburgh Castle went through the largest paranormal investigation in history. A psychologist named Dr. Richard Wiseman from Hertfordshire University in southeast England enlisted the help of 240 volunteers to explore the haunted sites of the castle in a 10-day study. These visitors were picked from around the world, and only those who had no knowledge of the haunted history of the castle. They were led in groups of 10 through the creepy, damp cellars, chambers, and vaults, all while Wiseman's team came prepared with an array of high-tech ghost-busting equipment such as thermal imagers, geomagnetic sensors, temperature probes, night vision equipment, and digital cameras. At the end of the experiment came a surprising conclusion. Nearly half of the visitors reported phenomenon they could not explain. The reason behind the surprise, as I had mentioned, the volunteers were hand-picked. People who've never heard of Edinburgh's hauntings, and who were never told about the particular cells or vaults and their history. They were also taken to locations that had no history of activity as well. Yet the highest number of paranormal experienced by the volunteers were reported to take place that were said to be haunted. The volunteers experienced sudden drops in temperature, seeing shadowy figures, feelings of being watched, and even more physical activities such as a person reported a burning sensation on the arm, an unseen presence touching a person's face, and the feeling of something tugging at their clothes. Wiseman, a skeptic at first, tried to expose the myths of several British hauntings, admitted his surprise at these results. One of the most interesting overnight experiments involved closing a young woman in a dark Southbridge vault alone, an experience that had taken her to tears. She was placed in a room with a video camera so she could record what she saw, heard, and felt. Immediately, she reported hearing breathing from a corner of the room, and she thought she saw a flash or some sort of light in the corner as well. The only hard evidence was a few digital photographs that featured such anomalies as spots of light and strange fogging. 2 photos showed a green glob that no one could explain. So what do you think? Edinburgh Castle is said to be the most haunted place in all of Europe. Do you believe it? I couldn't find the pictures from the investigation, and not much else either. Due to YouTube demonetizing videos like mine, feel free to check out my Patreon page and become part of the family. I create videos on cryptids, abductions, hauntings, serious killers, and more. Feel free to hit that like button, leave a comment, and please subscribe. I would also like to thank my supporting Patreon thus far. I hope you all have a very good night.